I want to deal with the topic of the relationship between spirituality and experience. What I'll be doing is a summary of a huge amount of data and something that has become very important in our society, and I want to explain why it's become important. If there's one thing that marks modern people in our kind of society, it is a fascination with and a concentration on what we call experience. Now, I put it to you that the way we use experience is one of the most difficult, slippery words in modern English. What do we mean when we talk about experience, particularly when we talk about spiritual experience or experiences? I'd like to point something out that you can get from a dictionary if you look at it closely. Definition of the word, experience. Originally, until about 100 years ago, if you talked about experience, it would be people would speak about your personal involvement in something that happens. Okay? You can experience an earthquake. Means there's been an earthquake and you were there. It happened to you. Okay, so personal involvement in a event. Then secondly, and this is very ancient, the impact on that event on your senses and your five senses. And this was the basic understanding of it. Something happens that you either see or hear, but you don't just see or hear, you smell or taste or touch. So it is sensory, something that happens to you, and it has an impact on your senses. Now, notice that it involves all five senses, at least originally, the way the word was understood. Then, about 400 years ago, there was a shift from those two senses to one particular, those two meanings, to focus on one of the five senses. So if you experience something means that you have observed an event. So the experience of an accident is not just being involved in an accident, but you were there and you observed it. You observed the event. Notice the concentration now on one sense. Which is the sense that predominates? Sight. Smell. Yeah. But also, if it's a loud accident, it will be the bang, but it's sense of sight. Now, since the Romantic movement in the West, from about 1800 onwards, experience basically has got a different focus, and that's on the emotions. So the emotional impact or effect of an event. So the experience of love doesn't mean getting married and having kids, but it means a feeling of being in love or being loved. Right? So you go, instead of love was very closely connected with sex, then it shifts to emotion. It was very closely connected with, marriage, but then to emotion, and a particular kind of emotion. Yes?
Just on the history too, though, that you also get that in the chivalry.
Yes.
Where and so you've got your wife, sure, but then you've got your love. And,
okay.
And it's never fulfilled in marriage or love or sex even, but it's...
But they didn't usually use the word experience for that. They would use the word passion.
Sure.
And so romantic, passionate love is that focus on the feeling of heightened emotion. But what happened in the Romantic movement, what was exceptional there became the norm, and people were looking for the particular emotional effects of things. And then one of the strangest ones is, and this is out of it, all the dictionaries have some reference to a religious emotion or a emotional state, a religious emotional state. So let me go. If people say, have you had the experience of salvation, what does that mean?
Have you had a very big epiphany, a moment when you felt the revelation of salvation come upon you?
Yes. Not only did you feel saved at that moment, but do you subsequently feel saved? No. Not only did it impact on you emotionally at a particular point, but do you feel saved? Do you feel that you are born again? Do you feel filled with the Spirit? Right? So emotional state. Now you need to see the shift here from senses to emotions to understand what's going on in our society. In recent times, this development, which occurred long before television, has been accelerated by television, and since television now the whole electronic media, computers, cell phones, all the whole electronic visual media, the video sphere that we are increasingly living in. I don't know whether you realise, but many people of your age spend a large part of their day in a video sphere. Do you know what I mean by video sphere? They aren't out there in the real world, but they are in the artificial world of electronics, an electronically constructed world. Now, what this encourages is a kind of somebody called visual voyeurism. Now, what's voyeurism? It's a sexual term.
Hearing without participating.
Yes, it's looking without involvement, perving in sexual sense, perving at somebody or an event. So visual voyeurism. Now, what it means that you have a visual experience of life, but you don't actually experience it. So most of you have witnessed hundreds of deaths. And yet, how many of you have actually seen a person die? 3, 4.
Dying or dead?
No, not a dead person, a person dying. Not a dead person, a person dying. Right, I see that's very rare, and yet on television you've seen, and films you've seen, dozens, hundreds of people dying. No, we have experienced the whole world. I can put my television on and I can travel to South America, I can go everywhere, and I can voyeuristically experience the world. Now, voyeuristic means as a spectator rather than as a participant. That's what is offered on television, and then in that video world, people actually try and produce experiences. So they try and produce falling in love. They try and produce horror. They produce particular experiences. You can see it most clearly in advertisements. Advertisements produce experiences to get you to buy a product. So you get the production of artificial experiences. And then what happens then is stuff that interests you, ordinary stuff, you become bored with, and to attract your interest, you always got to have something new or extraordinary or sensational. We get so turned off with the ordinary that only extraordinary stuff grabs our attention. And it escalates, so it has to be more and more extraordinary, the way it impacts on us, and more fantastic. Now, the result of it is that most of us live in what Bruce Dorr, an Australian poet, called a decreated life. a life outside of creation, an artificial life, a second-hand life. We don't actually smell and taste and touch and feel and see things and hear things directly, but it's always mediated through something else. Tom?
Just on that, maybe it's a little to the side, but is it? Do you think that technology is just neutral and it's and then we use it for our own vices and virtues, or it is actually a product of our age as well? Because I'm more inclined to the second, that even the technologies that developed since Romanticism are actually somehow products of what we. It's no accident that movies came up and obsession with photography and movies. It's not completely neutral, but actually has something to do with the rise of that kind of view.
It comes out of it and accelerates it. It's never neutral. Yeah. It's never neutral, and it doesn't mean that it's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. Yeah. It's not neutral.
But it's not just that science has developed there. It's also that it's somehow a product of our imagination or where we want to go to a certain degree too, or what taps into something that's already there.
Yeah, see, for example, one thing that I've had to do quite deliberately, just on that, is, you know how easy it's to email somebody or to ring them on the phone. Do you know what I do? If I don't ring people, fellow colleagues in the building, I don't email them. And I've made a decision not to email them, not to phone them. Why?
It's a lot more personal, face-to-face.
Face-to-face. Unless I'm, stuck for time or they're not in, I will always prioritise face-to-face encounter, because the other one, either of those aren't neutral. Face-to-face is very threatening too. They're not neutral, but they're different and they aren't equivalent to each other. So an email is quite different to emailing you, Chris, is quite different to knocking at your door. Yes, Chris?
But can't you say, or I think you can rightly say, that TV and internet and all of those, I can't remember what you called it.
Yes.
Mediums.
Yes. Media.
Can enhance our want to actually experience these things.
That's right.
You see Getaway do a special in Great Barrier Reef, so you want to go up and actually, because you've watched some presenter go on a boat ride around the Great Barrier Reef and stuff, that's not you experiencing it. No. You actually going, and it creates a want.
Yeah. Don't read me wrong, I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying this is a fact. And it has an effect on us. It has implications. It can be good, and it's. Look, I watch quite a lot of television. It's enriched my life. I've seen lots of films. I love films, but I need to be aware of what television is doing to me. If I want to live a full, rich life. It doesn't just enrich me, it can also impoverish me. And that's my focus here is to get us to understand what we mean by experience and why we focus on particular kinds of experience to the exclusion of other things. Yes, Maria?
I think though then on the other side you get people, hundreds of people nowadays who will only live in that visual world, and they go so far that they don't even have a real life anymore. And this phenomenon of people just thriving on watching things on TV, and people's real lives in photos and TV without ever having a real life themselves.
You get that with secondary students, and particularly boys, but girls to some extent too, who have no face-to-face friends and yet have hundreds of friends via what? Facebook and Twitter. Twitter and Facebook. I'm right. You see, now I'm not saying that's bad. It's better to have 20 Facebook friends than no friends at all. But can you see the problem? That's yours. Yes, Vaughan, and then Tom. Yes.
I was just thinking that you can see some of the impacts of this, like in the TV sitcom world, where people become so obsessed with celebrity.
Oh, yes.
And it's almost like, someone's died when the show goes off the air, because they've become so involved in the relationships, like say with the TV show Friends,
Yes.
And you actually feel like you're one of the gang in the TV show. And emotionally, you invest in these shows.
Yes.
And it leads to kind of like part of the celebrity worship is the fact that you think you know
these people,
but you don't know them at all.
No.
But you know the character, and there's an emotional play.
For some people, their favourite characters and shows are more real than their own life. So the woman that they like, the good-looking woman on a television soapy, whatever it is, they feel more attached to than their own wife. And if they're given a choice, which would you have to trade one or the other? I hate to say which one they'd choose. Tom, yes.
Oh yeah, that just reminded me when Chris spoke about holidays too, that author Alain de Botton, he's around, he's just written a book about work. He's all in the papers at the moment.
Yes.
But he wrote a book about travel too, and he wrote on the disappointment of beach holidays that look so good when you're working. And you see this beautiful, nice beach there, good looking few girls there,
picking the girls, yes.
And then so you think, you pay up, from London, you pay your London desk, you get there. And the problem, he says, is that you're there now.
Yes.
The one difference between the picture and experience is that you're there.
Yes.
You've still got these silly worries, you've still got all your hang-ups and your problems.
Yes.
And you never enjoy it anymore and so part of it is that escapism where, this great life.
Yes.
And there's no worries there, none of those things. But actually, so it's a good thing then. That's the sort of danger, I suppose, that you then live reality without yourself in it.
Indeed. Julie?
But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, not correct. This is just reality stuff.
Discussion or debate, though, does not this the involvement or the evolution of TV and media and all these other things just. The only reason why we're all sucked into things like this or respond to it is because there's a need in us.
That's right. There's a need in us, and it fulfills a deep need, and that need is both positive and negative. It deals with our deepest desires. I mean, look, we all want to be loved and experience love. Okay, so we haven't much experience love, so we go into romance, whether it's a novel or a film or a television show. Is the desire to be loved and to have a relationship with the opposite sex good? Yes. Of course, absolutely. God made us that way. There's that positive, but then there's the other side, that reveals our dark side. There's not only the positive stuff sexually, but there's that whole underside of sexually, pornography and violence and down that side. That also reflects what? Why is there such a market for pornography and horror films and violence? It's not just our world's like that. Yes, right. It's a reflection of something in us. It's bringing that out into the open. Yep, both sides. Yep. Yeah.
I guess I'm hearing a lot of negative talk about this. Yeah. But I think there's still a lot of positives in it. I mean, for those that are physically or socially shut in, it provides an avenue of escape, and in turn, that provides an avenue of help for them.
Yep.
But also to connect with the wider world. I mean, how many pastors picked up a copy of Angels and Demons when the movie was released? Or how many picked up the first one? When that was released in the Da Vinci Code. There is, while, like we said before, there's positives and negatives, and I think we've found to pick up that some of the positives is that it gives me a direct line into somebody's life.
Yep.
To a place where they live, understand, and I can speak to them.
And it does help us to understand things that we wouldn't understand otherwise if it's used well. So, I'm not, by the way, what's my agenda here? It's not to say it's negative or positive, or even how can we use it positively, but I want to lead to the impact it's had on our experience of spirituality. What's the connection between spirituality and experience, the way it's impacted on spirituality. It's going to take a while to get here, but we need to take it in stages. Yes, Tom?
That's sort of going back to the sexual
yes.
Fascination
yes.
that we had.
I find it really interesting. On one of the news websites, if you scroll down to the bottom, you see the most clicked on news stories from the various websites in Australia. And without exception, every day in the top 5 news stories, always something relating to sex, which is one of the most clicked.
That's right.
Lady says she's had sex with 200 football players.
Yep.
Always something to do with that. It's one of the most popular stories.
Yep. Or else something sensational, that kind of thing. It's interesting, highlights. It's interesting what we highlight. The problem is that we don't highlight ordinary things and ordinary experience. Can I just finish this and then I will have a break, because I want to give you a break. Analysts have pointed out that this can lead to a disparagement of sensory experience. Disparagement means belittling of sensory experience. So, how many of us have ever been really hungry, physically tired? How much is our sense of smell and taste and touch, hearing, and particularly sight, that dominant modern sense, dulled by this? So that what happens then is that you become desensitized, or the danger is, it's not automatic, but you become desensitized to sensory experience. Now, it struck me when I was a student of how much just being a student and living in a student's world put me into a different cocoon to life on the farm. One of my favourite pastimes was to go shooting rabbits during the daytime. After being at uni or at SEM, I'd come home and I just couldn't see the blighters. Now, they would be there and I couldn't spot them. Now, they'd run away. So to start off with, I'd always go out with a dog who was much more attuned to it than myself, and had trained the dog. But after a while, basically, my senses were attuned so that I'd have all the senses together. You'd have smell and sight and sound sort of coming in sync, and you'd see the rabbit there in that bush. But it took a while for you to regain that kind of sensitivity. What having iPods and being confronted with television screens do to me is gradually lessen my sensory sensitivity. I don't notice things. I don't hear things. I don't smell, particularly don't smell and taste and touch things. And for many people, then it leads to a boredom with ordinary things, ordinary reality. And this is a shame, because where is life lived? In ordinary things. And if I look back on my life, it's the ordinary things that are most extraordinary and wonderful. And the danger is that I don't see what's under my nose. I'm so caught up with the glamour girls on television that I don't see how beautiful my own wife is. I don't notice the facial expression of my children. I don't read your faces properly. Right? It's losing that sense of sensitivity, and you become bored with ordinary things. And the danger is then you focus on the fantasy. Now, God's given us imagination, sure, so that we can fantasize, but the primary use of imagination is not to imagine what isn't, but to imagine what is. Can I repeat? The primary use of imagination, the ability to see, is not to see what isn't, but to see what's actually there, and you never notice it. Even if it's something as simple as the face of someone that's close to you. To see it, and to imagine then, to sense what's going on inside and what that face is revealing to you about the person. Lastly, people point out that the problem is, if you go too far down this road, that what people crave always is excitement. A craving for excitement. Now, There's nothing wrong with being excited, but that's the thing that people look for. There's a close connection between boredom and a craving for excitement, because when you feel excited, you feel alive. When you're bored, you feel dead. I don't know whether you've noticed that many people in our society basically feel that they're not really alive, that they feel kind of dead. And that's the deepest problem we have, is people who are somehow living dead, emotionally dead. At least that's the way they think. And if you feel emotionally dead, what will you want to do? Well, if you go down that way, but then the thing is, yeah, what?
Something exciting to stimulate you.
To make you feel alive. And for some people, it takes perverse forms. Self-mutilation. I don't know if you realise how common that is. Why do people self-mutilate? To feel something. You know, you have a sense of apathy, feeling nothing, but at least you feel something and you feel alive. Now, there's other reasons too. That's not the full story, but that's, according to psychologists, is one of the main reasons for self-mutilation, is people feel so emotionally and physically, sensory dead, they're not feeling anything, that they want to feel alive.
Sex is like a big motivation for that.
Righto, the same with pornography, the same with horror, thrills, bungee jumping, drugs, all those things. You need these things to be able to feel alive. Okay, let's have a break and I'll pick up from there after the break.